Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Sevil. I'm a social anthropologist and a senior researcher at Center for East European and International Studies. My research is focused here at SOIS on religious pluralism and urban transformation. The purpose of this meeting today to start a discussion about living together before and after the Karabakh War. After 45 days of military combats in Nagorno-Karabakh, the truce agreement on November 10th stopped the fighting around the conflicted territory. But the situation seems to be quite difficult. During this heavy conflict, there were very few attempts toward a peace process, and anti-war activity seems to be a taboo topic on both sides. With this online event, I would like to take this opportunity to start raising questions about possibilities and challenges of living together, and look at potential routes for a peace dialogue on a grassroots level, not on the level of political elites. Armenians and Azerbaijanis lived together side by side in pre-Soviet and Soviet periods, in and outside of national borders. They have shared territory and everyday coexistence. So we would like to look at those moments and practices of living together and living with difference, which can be observed on a local level in the South Caucasus. For that, I'm very delighted to introduce our speakers today. Sevil Huseynova, PhD in social anthropology. She received it at Humboldt University, Berlin. She is based in Berlin. She is project manager at Center for Independent Social Research in Berlin. She's a member of International Imagine Center for Conflict Transformation. And she's also the co-author of the book, Beyond the Karabakh Conflict, Kizil, Shafak, and Kerkenji, The Village Exchange, published in 2012 by Heinrich Böll Stiftung. And we will hear more about this research today. Our second speaker is Vadim Romashov, a sociologist and doctoral researcher at Tampere Peace Research Institute at Faculty of Social Sciences at University of Tampere. His research addresses relations of minority groups in multicultural settings in post-Soviet society. And he's currently finalizing his doctoral thesis on everyday coexistence of ethnic Armenians and Azerbaijanis in rural settlements of Georgia. Welcome to this discussion, Sevil and Vadim. Before we start, I would say just a few words on our procedure. After your two inputs, and I will have two questions to you. And after that, we will have 20 and 25 minutes for a general discussion. So there is a chance to ask the speakers additional questions, and you can type your questions in the chat thread during the session. We will collect them, and we have also assistance from SOIS. Please do not please do not set us anonymous question. We would like to ask you that that you indicate your name, perhaps also your institution, and also location. Thank you very much. Okay, let's start. Sevil, it's your floor now. Yeah, you have your PPT presentation, yes?
Yeah, it's ready.
Your screen with us.
Yeah, it's ready. Thank you, Tsipilma, for the introduction. As you already mentioned, living together is a very complex topic. And today we will be talking about the deep and the long conflict. And my first and maybe the most important message is that today most people who call themselves Azerbaijanis or Armenians, they have forgotten that they have lived together much longer than they have been in conflict. As you already mentioned, little attention was paid and is paid to this topic. And the best proof of that is the last war. So first of all, I would like to thank the choice for, and personally, Tsepilma Darieva for organizing this important discussion. I start with focusing on key aspects. There was and is a big difference between practice and the intensity of contacts in rural and urban areas, especially in big cities like Baku, Tbilisi, Yerevan. In rural areas, they had much more stable ethnic borders than in cities, and until the collapse of the Soviet Union. Religion, of course, in its everyday form, also gave many nuances to these differences and borders. So there were Armenian and Azerbaijani villages in the South Caucasus. Villages with mixed population were few, and today my colleague Vadim will tell more about them. In cities, especially in the post-World War II years, ethnic and religious borders were no longer as important for many citizens. Russian was spreading as a lingua franca. Contacts were much more diverse and intensive. There were many inter-ethnic marriages in Baku, in Tbilisi, and even in Yerevan. We know that during the Armenian pogroms in Sumgait back in 1988 and in Baku in 1990, Azerbaijanis were helping, supporting, and even rescuing their Armenian neighbors, colleagues, friends, relatives. Almost every native Bakuvian family can tell you such stories. And this was also the result of intensive contacts. There were also some contacts and mutual assistance practices in rural areas, but we know much less about this topic. And here I would like briefly present our research, which we were conducting with our Armenian colleagues. And now I'm sharing my presentation. Yeah, can you see it? Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So it's about the case. We conducted, we started the case of peaceful conflict, the peaceful collective village exchange, which took place just in the beginning of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, within the process of ethnic separation back in 1989. At that time, as you know, lots of people became refugees. And just a moment. The civic initiative took place between the Armenian and Azerbaijani community, Dunashok or Kizil Shafak and Kerkench village in Azerbaijan and Armenia. There were lots of individual housing exchange at that time during the conflict. But this is the only case we know which was exchanged collectively. As you see on the map, the distance between these both communities was more than 500 kilometers. Almost all residents of both villages took part in the discussions of way out of the situation. There were different ideas. for instance, to build a new village for the whole community in Azerbaijan, or just to move collectively to Russia, to stay and resist to the expulsion, etc. Finally, they decided to preserve the unity and integrity of their communities and their property, of course, and to move collectively to Azerbaijan and Armenia, respectively. For this purpose, they needed to find a village which residents were in the same situation. At the end, they found the proper village through Baku, using friends and family networks. After representatives of both villages met each other and visited the villages, they concluded an informal civil agreement. And on its basis, the peaceful collective village exchange was implemented later. One of the most important terms of this agreement was to preserve the integrity of cemeteries. The Azerbaijani cemetery in Kızıl Şafak in Armenia and Armenian cemetery in Kirkech in Azerbaijan. So these conditions is still being honored, as you see. Yeah, and of course, the leaders and organizers of this village exchange were also very important important contribution to the whole process. As we see, there were not only formal leaders, as for instance, Sovkhoz leader, director, or they were just informal leaders, some aksakals of the both villages. In the course of the village exchange, the both people of the both villages, Armenians and Azerbaijanis, they had to live together for a while. And Azerbaijanis and Armenians were helping each other to adapt to the new life conditions, to household conditions. And of course, there were different examples. For instance, women were teaching each other to bake a bread because they had different types of baking a bread. New residents of both villages suffered from climate change. They had to adapt the new forms of agriculture, to change from winemaking to farming and vice versa. New generation of both communities know the history of their villages. Unlike their parents and great-parents, they perceive Kızıl Şafak and Kirkech, that is the villages where they are living now, as their homelands. And I just want to add that this research was conducted by support of Heinrich Böll Foundation, and there is a book in Russian and English, and they are available in internet. And concluding, I would say that this case, especially this case, demonstrate that the depth and the interesting specifics of interethnic relations. An example of collective grassroots self-organization. Despite the troubles with the Soviet authorities, they managed to self-organize, preserve their communities, escape the fate of refugees. The fact that those people could realize this project reflects the rich interaction experience between Azerbaijani and Armenian rural communities. This experience is very diverse and often very positive. One can talk about an effective model of mutual assistance and problem solving at the collective level. Now I'm finishing my input, and yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sevil, for this brief input into your research and for this example of interethnic cooperation, which took place in 2000s. And now I would like to invite Vadim Romashov for his brief input. Vadim?
Thank you.
Sevil, could you please
I'm just doing it.
your presentation?
Is
Just
it done?
unshare your screen.
I have done. No?
Not just seeing your screen. Yeah.
Yes, now. Vadim, so now this is your floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tsipilma. Thank you, Zois Institute, for inviting me to this very timely event. Unfortunately, we have to arrange this event after this very sad situation and those happenings that we all witnessed, I assume, in the region. I think that this topic together nowadays is the most actual one, actually, especially after the agreement that you have mentioned that was achieved 2 days ago. However, a lot of things still must be done, and I hope that at least with this kind of discussions, we can somehow foster the situation and foster the progress and bringing Armenians and Azerbaijanis to live together once again. But I would like to correct, sorry for that, if I may, I would like to correct the topic of our discussions, living together before and after the Karabakh War. I should say that Armenians and Azerbaijanis have been living also during the war, and they continue living together, at least in rural settlements in Georgia. And this is my topic, and I should say that before going into this direction to study this, to do this ethnographic work in rural settlements of Georgia, I used to do more IR, international relations related research about the conflicts in the region. And I was also very much overwhelmed, captured by those narratives, nationalistic narratives which are coming from Armenian and Azerbaijani societies. And my surprise was when I was interacting with Armenians and Azerbaijanis in big cities like St. Petersburg, like in very daily occasions. And I realized that actually the stories of hatred probably is not the one which is dominant in the relationship of Armenian and Azerbaijanis in very everyday daily lives. And I was even more fascinated when I came across Tom DeWaal's second edition of his very famous book, The Black Garden, where he has added, to which he has added a story of his short visit to one of these villages, Armenian Azerbaijanis villages in Georgia, Khojorny. And this basically was the decisive moment when I decided to get engaged in studying this particular village. And not only this, because later on I realized that there are quite many of these villages in Georgia. Well, many, relatively many, but actually Khojorny and another more famous village of Tsopi, which are located, I hope you all can see the pointer of my mouse. It's on the south of Marneuli district, which is a part of Kvemakartli region of Georgia. And there are at least two, this most famous villages called Tsopi and Khojorny. I mean, famous in terms of that they've been covered by journalistic reportages as the case of peaceful coexistence of Armenians and Azerbaijanis. However, of course, these stories are widely muted, and they are not that much discussed within the Armenian and Azerbaijani societies, and even in a wider audience which are interested in the conflict resolution process in this region. But of course, there are other villages, and I also visited them, and I spent quite a lot of time, in total 6 months, studying these 2 villages and other 4 villages, and including also the Marneuli city, which also has the population of both Armenians and Azerbaijanis. I should say that these stories, these cases are very much understudied by academia, and it's not that much visible also in the media. However, actually today there was very nice and small story on the Radio Liberty about Tsopi village. I advise you all to watch this short, small video. For you, just to give you a brief about statistics, how the situation looks like in these villages. So if you take the whole Marneuli municipality, we can see that the share of Armenians is quite small comparing to the majority of Azerbaijanis. But as I have already mentioned, there are some villages in which the proportion is very different. And Tsopi and Hodjorny, if you can see, there is a proportion of 75% of Azerbaijanis living in Tsopi and 25% almost living of Armenians living in Tsopi. The situation in Hodjorny is reversal, so the 20% of the population is Azerbaijani and 75% are Armenians. And so this is the two most famous and the most visited villages for those who are interested in peaceful coexistence of Armenians and Azerbaijanis. As for my own research, I had basically two practice-oriented research questions. I'm not going to discuss here a theoretical part, of course, but mostly practice-oriented questions. As I've mentioned you that the practices of everyday peace of Armenians and Azerbaijanis in general is are very much understudied. And the research, for example, that Sevil has just presented is usually the research of the past. We have also some researches which were done in urban areas, but very few actually about rural settlements. And if you know, especially in the case of Karabakh, and also in the case of what Sevil has presented, villages in Armenia and Azerbaijan, actually a lot of populations of Armenians and Azerbaijanis on both territories lived actually in villages, in rural areas. And that's why I think that my research, and I hope that there will be more researchers on the rural settlements of Armenians and Azerbaijanis, is very actually important and very timely, especially given that peacemaking and peace building in the region quite often overlook the real existent practices of everyday peace between these two ethnic groups. Again, I cannot go into very much of details of my research, but I would like to mention that I do not romanticize the everyday life of these two ethnic groups in these villages, which is actually the case of many journalistic accounts. So they come to, there are already been many journalists who have visited this place, who have published their reports on Tsopi, on Hodjorny, and some of other villages. But quite often they present this kind of very pinky picture of the situation there. And this is, I assume, also quite a problematic issue when we are talking about everyday life. Our everyday life is very difficult in many ways. It's full of conflicts, full of contestations. So we should not really, when we are doing peace building work, we should not really probably doing this from the perspective that peace is something ideal when it is implemented in the everyday life of people. And that's why I think that academic accounts of this kind of villages are important, because they can go into deeper parts of everyday life of these people, especially ethnographic research, and show that this life is not that easy, but still there is a lot of things which we can learn from this everyday life and probably implement in other parts of their conflict zone in Karabakh, and maybe even other cases which are not even related to Armenian and Azerbaijani relations. So just to give you an example, for example, in these villages, there are quite many actually historical sites. like this one that you can see on the picture. This is a ruins of church, which is, according at least to what locals have told me, that this church is dated back to 5th century. And typically, to the case of Armenian and Azerbaijani relations, these kind of historical sites are also the sites of contestation, even among the local Armenians and Azerbaijanis. They both claim that these either belong to Armenian Christian past, or in case of Azerbaijanis, they claim that it's part of Albanian period of this region. And of course, there are a lot of different narratives, completely antagonistic narratives that you can hear. So if you would ask me, is there hate speech in these villages? My answer would be, of course, yes. The in-group and out-group relations there are very difficult, are very complex, and highly polarized along ethnic, cultural, religious, and other value-based differences. If you ask me, is there violence? Well, at least if we speak about overt violence or direct violence or open violence, my answer would be no. This case is, even despite that this, if you as you have seen on the map, the Armenian and the territory of Armenia and Azerbaijan is very close. The border of Armenia and Azerbaijan is also very close. And this border has been the site for military conflicts, military activities. And these people who are living there, they have witnessed, they have experienced the conflict themselves in terms of even the Bagratashen, the village on the border on the Armenian side. At some point had a lot of Azerbaijani population, and at some point it was during the Soviet time it even was called like Lambalo, and so a lot of people, as Sevil has mentioned, this during this time of ethnic separation has left these villages which were neighboring villages to Tsopi, Khojorny, and other villages on the Georgian territory, and people have seen the refugees, they have seen the grief of these people. They have friends and relatives who were fighting in Karabakh. So we should not really also say that these people are living without conflict because they are located on the Georgian territory. They are living with this conflict, within this conflict. And they are also very much affected by the informational environment because they are these nationalistic narratives coming from Armenia and Azerbaijan, because they are following the news, they're following the media of Armenia, of Azerbaijan. And of course, they are very much internalized these nationalistic narratives and discourses. But to stay on a positive side, on a positive note, I should mention that what I have noticed that the local people, they have managed to construct an alternative to this ethnic-based nationalistic narratives. They have managed to construct the identity of their villages. They very much identify themselves with their local rural communities, and it's kind of counterposed to the societies in Armenia or in Azerbaijan, and they consider themselves to be different in the sense that they still manage to live peacefully, and they call those relations that they have there, they still call them peace. And this is important, that we should understand peace from the perspective of local people. What I can say, what contribute to this peaceful coexistence, or I would just probably use the term coexistence of differences rather than peaceful coexistence, which is a more pinky representation of the situation there, that these people, they have a great experience of the past, of the shared labor, especially during the Soviet time, because of the kolkhozes, if you know this, collective farms, then industries, and they work together. They've been engaged in basically doing the same work. So they somehow created during the past these communities of practices, and to date they are still somehow maintain this. Of course, even though these industries have been demolished and deconstructed and destructed, basically, they still manage to keep these relations. of communities of practice, because at least they share the same problems, the same concerns, and they are more or less doing the same work. Yes, nowadays more individually than collectively, but still they are living rural life, which is quite similar among the population. And that's why they can ask for help. They are all competent basically in what they're doing. So there is an exchange of competencies and mutual help at the everyday life. Another thing that I would like to mention, and since I don't have that much time, I would still mention that they are avoiding, of course, the conflict issue in their discussion. This is a taboo. However, it doesn't mean that they do not discuss this never. Of course, they do discuss it from time to time, but still the conflict issue is part of in-group community, or like not the whole village should be talking about this, but like ethnic Armenians and ethnic Azerbaijanis, they discuss within their groups the issue a lot. And with all this hatred that we usually can hear from Armenian and Azerbaijani societies, and at families, of course. But public places are something else. This is the place where this issue should be avoided and should not be discussed. More than this, they practice what I call this kind of exaggerated respect and care towards the other. It's done in a very demonstrative way to underline that we respect our Armenians on our Azerbaijanis living in this village. So sometimes they even sacrifice, and I cannot go into details here now, but even sacrifice the relationships with their own ethnic, co-ethnic members, or the members of their ethnic group, in order to show the respect and care towards the neighbors from Armenian or Azerbaijani community.
Okay.
Just to conclude, the importance of infrastructure of this specialist schools, this public institutes, it has enormous role in constructing these narratives of the past, because it's the way how people being interacting together since the childhood. This is the way where this is the place where they learn the language of each other. This is the place where this is the periods of their life to which they constantly refer when they need to mile down the conflict-ridden relationships in this village. So this is a very important part of their collective narrative, communal narrative that they have constructed. So, and to conclude, I need to say that again, that everyday peace for me means mostly living together, if we're using this term, with differences. So it means let the other to be as such, not to change, not to transform, not to persuade in something, but to let the other to be as such. So it's everyday peace with conflicts, inequalities, and even to some extent with violence, structural violence in this case. But it is coexistence, and from the local perspective, it is a peace. And local people are very proud of this relationship that they managed to establish and keep throughout all these difficult years of the active military phases in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And another important part of peace for them is well-being. So they all basically, people in these villages share that the struggle for well-being in their very difficult rural settings. Thank you very much. I need to stop here, I think. Sorry if I took more than was expected.
Thank you, Vadim. Thank you, Vadim, very much for your insightful presentation. We are a little bit slightly run of our time. I would just perhaps summarize very briefly, and I have one question. And we have already some other question in chat thread. So yes. You both provided us with very interesting examples of living together, and also you have provided specific aspects of living together. Living together doesn't mean that you are living absolutely together and sharing everything. No, it is not. There is living together means also living with difference, but perhaps even living together separated. there are specific places where people can share their everyday life. But I found very interesting that you have mentioned about exaggerated hospitality in these villages. What is actually hospitality is one of the main features of the Caucasus culture. You can have it in many different regions. And Sevil, you have also mentioned in your input as an example of informal civil agreement, civil cooperation, something that reminds me kind of folk diplomacy. So there are specific mechanisms of coming together which are observable on a local, very local level. But my question would be, which is also coincide with one of the questions in the chat, what do you think? Is it this your case studies findings? These studies, do they have relevance for other regions in the South Caucasus? Do we deal more with the unique example, let's say, of this village exchange and a unique example of living in multicultural setting in Georgia? Who would like to start?
I can do this.
Vadim, okay, and then Sevil.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Indeed, this is the question that I quite often receive when I present the case of coexistence in Georgia, because quite often I hear that, well, but this is Georgia, it's different. And this is what we usually hear when we also in the case of probably of Sevil. Well, but it was in the past. It was the Soviet period, and this probably those. I take this kind of criticism in terms of being affected very much by the nationalistic rhetoric again, and we've been told that this is nowadays is impossible. That this is not relevant, that this is a different case. Indeed, it is different. Of course, every case is unique in every context is unique. And also, even when we compare the two neighboring villages of Khajorny and Tsop, we will find that even in these two cases, there are a lot of differences. But the thing that what we can learn is this very local practice of people of everyday peace, which can be shared, but maybe in other cases cannot be shared. We should, of course, avoid copy-pasting of the models. It's impossible. And moreover, it's not only impossible, but it's also part of normative violence, actually. What is important, actually, to show and demonstrate these examples, to show to people from other localities that you see that how these people are interacting, being considered probably the members of the same ethnic group as to which you consider yourself to be belong to, and but I would suggest that it is local people to which we show these examples who, in the end, must decide whether they can implement these practices or not. And it's not only a question whether, when I speak about Armenian and Azerbaijani relations, it doesn't mean that, for me, it's also only a context. It can be applied, of course, to, not applied, but it can be shown as an example and as a lesson to be learned, but it is, again, up to other people to whom we are showing this example, whether they are taking it or not. But it doesn't matter. Like, as I said, like Armenian and Azerbaijani relationship is just only a context in this sense. But it could be a Georgian Ossetian relation, Georgian Abkhaz relations, even, I don't know, Greek and Turk in Cyprus and whatever else. I mean, it's not really the question of, we should contextualize every lessons and every models in the end.
Thank you, Vadim. Sevil, would you like to? Would you like to?
Thank you, Vadim, also for mentioning that all these cases are unique and they have their own specifics. And even if we compare, for instance, coexistence, Armenian and Azerbaijani coexistence in Baku or even in Tbilisi, we can see these differences. Unlike Tbilisi, in Baku, there were, as we know, clashes, violence back in the beginning of 19th century and during the modern conflict. So this experience of coexisting, it wasn't, let's say, in demand, but it should be researched, it should be studied, and of course we should think about some kind of positive experience, yes. And for instance, if we're talking about this case of village exchange, and as I mentioned about the model, why this actually was able, why they were successful. It wasn't like their own decision. It was they were forced to flee their homeland. But at the situation of the conflict, they mobilized all local and regional resources, the capital, the social capital that they had, that they accumulated during this coexistence, because they had Armenian neighboring villages, both from Georgia and Armenia, because this namely this village, Kızıl Şafak, was on the border with Georgia and Armenia, in Armenia with Georgia. So this mutual, I think that the Georgian side, closeness to Georgia border was also very important in this case, because in the situation of danger, they could just flee and somehow to arrange this village exchange. So every cases are very specific. They have their own specifics, and we should talk about these specifics and about kind of models, of course, of positive models of cooperation and mutual assistance on collective level.
Yeah, I see. Yes, we have quite many comments, I would say, and some questions from the audience. Thank you very much for your questions and your contributions. We will try to collect some opinions. Some of them, I think, they have been already answered by our speakers. One which is now, I will just read, yes. Bernard Drino from AEC Paris branch of the Helsinki Citizens Assembly, international network which was active during and after the First Karabakh War in the late 90s and early 2000s. My question, do you think that after this war, new dialogue initiatives could be possible and meeting to take place with people from Armenia and Azerbaijan in Georgia? Did you? Yes, this is more or less a question. What is perhaps the Vadim that possible to people meet for dialogue initiatives in Georgia? I think it is already quite a tradition meeting in Georgia, and perhaps this I will make a kind of bridge of to the next question to Sevil and to Vadim regarding what is your experience of peace building ideas. I know that there was a network of scholars and academics in Armenia and Azerbaijan who work together. Do you think we can continue this kind of cooperation after this war?
I think that the existing networks of specialists, of peace activists, and they are working as they used to work. I mean, not all of them, unfortunately. And this is a big problem when we're talking about the track 2 process of negotiation. As we know, there are track 1 and track 2 negotiation process, and track 2 is on the level of civil society, and track 1 on the state level. And ideally, these both processes should support each other. In reality, we had very complex situation, because the track 2 process, where I personally was involved in, was kind of very specific, let's say, space, yeah, because we had and still have different initiatives, different NGOs, different organizations. And they are, let's say, both. There are two kind of formats of such organizations. The first one, organizations which were organized, initiated by some big foundations, some EU or USA organizations, some donors, let's say, yeah. And another format, it's a grassroots format. So we should understand that there are different formats. And I would say that those who were grassroots formats, they are existing and they are working further. Unfortunately, we have seen lots of initiatives which were created top and down, and they were no stable, they were no long-term projects, let's say, and even the violence escalation of 2016 demonstrated that lots of our peace activists, our human rights defenders, they were like full of hate speech. They narratives were very nationalistic and even revanchistic. So I agree with some experts that who say that unfortunately the track 2 initiative and process were imitating the track 1 and using track 2 for the political purposes. So at the end, we have very, let's say, not solidarity within. We have no solidarity within our civil society, and even when the war, during the last war, when the civilians were dying, when there were lots of humanitarian problems, issues which should be solved right now. Our so-called, I would say, human rights defenders, they were insisting on their own loss, their own civilian victims and casualties. So, I mean, this is actually, I'm a little bit far from the question, but what I wanted to say that there are some initiatives which are still working, and I think that it's not true saying that the dialogue is not impossible at the moment of the conflict, of ongoing war. I don't think so. I think that we should work, and we should still work even in the situation of ongoing conflict.
Yes. Vadim, do you have some reflections? Otherwise, I have to how to handle with all these comments and chats. But Vadim, if you have your answer, please go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Sevil in many ways, and she's very experienced in this more than I am. I just can add maybe that we should really, in many ways, reconsider the notion of grassroots, because quite often it is attributed to track three, which is probabilities, but of course there is also not really fixed definitions of track 2 and track 3. But the problem of still that the grassroots, their voices are muted in a way that there is always an intermediary between grassroots people, like those, for example, who live in these rural settings of Georgia, Armenians, Azerbaijanis. Their voices are only transmitted through local NGOs, which is quite often, as Sevil mentioned, they are quite often part of this imitation of the track 1 level, which is basically more or less elitist level, but only at another level. And then journalists, yes, peace journalists at best, who are covering their stories and then transmit to wider audience, which is good, of course, but still it is very selective in many ways. And unless from my perspective, in general, the problem of peace building in this case may be that peace building should at some point get more converged with development aid. So the grassroots people, in many ways, they understand peace also from a very materialist perspective. Peace is also part of well-being in many different ways. Well-being not only to get rid of this hatred and nationalistic discourses, which is usually peace building is about, is discursive interventionism. How I usually refer to this kind of peace dialogues. They are very important. They are very important, but they are exclusive. They are usually non-public, so they are hidden from the wider audiences. And they are, of course, for good reasons as well. But in many ways, peace building can work also at another level, really contributing to development, well-being of grassroots people, and being engaged more with the humanitarian relief and humanitarian aid, development aid projects, but also from the perspective of peace. This convergence, I think, is important, and the one that we should probably, although those who are working in the field of peace building should probably consider and try to engage more in maybe in this direction. So this is my perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would pick up some comments and some questions. So you are free to decide which question would you like to answer. Dear audience, dear listeners, we have some questions I think have been already answered. Thank you very much, and please apologize me if something not coming now, but a little bit later perhaps. But I see that there is a very interesting questions. It is a long comment, but I would like to read it from Nora. Thank you for your very important discussion. Is it true that Armenians and Azerbaijanis have been living together before the conflict and even now in other countries quite peacefully? It is not a new discovery. But Armenians and Azerbaijanis living together in Nagorno-Karabakh can be different. The president of Azerbaijan does not hide the fact that they prefer Nagorno-Karabakh without Armenians. I'm Armenian and I have many Azerbaijani friends. We can disagree a lot, but I never had a feeling of hatred towards them. During our talks, I always express my understanding of Azerbaijani IDPs. Indeed, no matter how long they have lived in Ankara, they are free to call it their home too. But I have never received the same response from my Azerbaijani friends. There were many Armenians living in Baku too. It was their home. And now all Armenians being displaced of their homes, left their homes too. Based on my personal experience, I don't feel the same compassion from my Azerbaijani friends. This puts me in a big doubt whether they are happy to see Armenians living their home. These emerge many questions whether Armenians continuing to live in Nagorno-Karabakh will be safe. In fact, many refugees in Armenia are afraid now to go back. to their home. What are the guarantees of safe coexistence in Kharkiv? It's a very important and contribution, but I think it's more as a comment. And now in this context, we can't, I think, answer this question. Zina Gizeman, our student assistant at SOIS, to what extent do the current developments of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict influence the coexistence in these villages? And what do you think, how will it influence the future village life? Then I pick up more Lala Huseynova from Baku. Thank you for both presentations. First question, who do you think should be invited, involved, engaged as actors into the strategy design for reconstruction of the idea of coexistence? Since trust between two communities came down in zero. And the second, what kind of steps, events you see or know that could help to restore, engage some level of trust? There are some concrete questions, specific what events and who are the actors? Could there be some best practice example from Europe, such as South Tyrol? I would stop now here. Vadim would like to start?
Sorry, I forgot. Yep, quite difficult questions and quite specific. And again, we cannot really outline anything at the moment. What concrete steps could be done, especially like this ad hoc. Of course, and again, every situation is very difficult and very complex in its own context. Even I think when we are speaking now, and let's hope that all the people who had to leave the Karabakh region in different stages of the conflict will be finally giving a chance to come back to their former places of residences. And but again, the Karabakh region is so much has been always very much diverse. I mean, before the conflict, there are territories which were only populated by Azerbaijanis and only by Armenians. There are also places where they lived jointly together. So in how this will be practically arranged, I cannot even imagine, because nowadays the military hostilities just stopped a few days ago. And now it's up to those so-called peacekeepers or whatever to provide certain guarantees for the return of those people. But how it will be practically arranged, especially when we, as always, we can see, yes, they apparently, when we read this agreement that was signed, we can kind of notice that probably they had an idea that, well, something about local people, because they included these parts of coming back and restoring the communication and everything and transportation links, so which is somehow related to this everyday life of people. But in the end, the decision was totally and absolutely political, first of all. And so the lives of the everyday lives of people were not really considered. So apparently everything which is going to be done in this direction will be done according to the situation on the ground, and without involving civil society, peace building of different character to help these people to reconcile and bring them together and re-establish their lives there. It's simply, I think, impossible. There should be a huge intervention of peace building in this case. Because only peacekeepers, they do certain type of work and job. They can bring people to their villages if they agree. I hope that there will be any forced migration into the region or like forced return of these people. I hope that everything will be done voluntarily. But in this case, of course, they should be, and there is a lot of work that I envision for the track 2, track 3, and civil society in general, and public figures. For me, it's just a massive work, and I really cannot outline what concrete events and what kind of concrete actors should be involved there. I think there should be really different types of actors and different types of events be involved. And of course, including these peace dialogues, at least on neutral territories, to prepare societies for reconciliation, for peace. But in this case, they should be, I think, made as public as possible. Of course, with providing political guarantees. But at the same time, what I think the good thing in this agreement, that now at least one side seems, for political purposes and political reasons, to speak about peace, because it is more or less how they, or at least the coexistence was mentioned many times by the leaders of Azerbaijan in the end of this military phase of the conflict. So at least the discourse is there. So the thing that now we need to grasp this discourse, like to kind of catch the tongue of politicians and make them do something on the ground, providing a certain room, like wider room for the track 2 actors, for the civil societies, so that they could operate safely with local people on the ground and also on the neutral territories. But how to do this in practice, I think it's also a very political question. And but
yes, yeah. Thank you. Yes, I agree with you that there's so many different levels we touched today, and I'm very happy that we have examples of research on the grassroots level. But Sevil, would you like to respond to?
Yeah, it was really a very complex question in order to address all.
No, there is no need to.
Yeah, but just some points. For instance, was what Nora was touching upon. I think that right now no one knows how these mechanisms of new treaty, of new deal will be look like. Yeah, so it's so impossible to predict. Yeah, how all these mechanisms. This is the good questions for our leaderships, yeah, and stakeholders. And for me, for instance, from this treaty, my concern, for instance, there is no provision about some groups of people who, for instance, are not in this treaty. Yeah, I mean, people who Armenians, for instance, who are living not in Karabakh, but living, for instance, in Kelbajar and other 7 surrounding districts. So what mechanisms for them, for those who want to live or who want to remain there, will be implemented? So there are lots of questions. And regarding Azerbaijani IDPs, is also the question how they will be integrated in the places where everything is destroyed. So there are so many questions on the humanitarian level, and I think this is a good test for our authorities, for our leadership. Now, through these measures, through this treaty, to demonstrate this confidence-building measures. I mean, this is a first test for them, how they will implement all this agreement and provisions. Regarding the Lala's question about who might be involved in the dialogues or in the new projects or initiatives, I think that during this last war, we've seen how many young generation, how many youngsters, young people demonstrated their positions against war. This no war movement, I would say, was very positive in this term. Yeah, we have seen how how our colleagues, friends, relatives, being very intellectual, public intellectuals, being journalists, being critical to political regimes, how they turned to be very supportive to revanchist ideas. At the same time, we have seen the new movement. And I think that exactly this new generation, this new young people, and we don't know what shaped their views, whether this is their study abroad, whether this is their political views, we don't know, but it's interesting to study and maybe to know more about them, to get more information and to support these people. Because there were some leftists, for instance, organizations who demonstrated their position, and from both sides, Armenia, Azerbaijan. I'm not talking about some established organization like Imagine Center for Conflict Transformation, and for us it was like very positively to see this people. I think that we should think about the new approach, the new formats, even if we have such different examples. What Vadim was talking about, what I demonstrated as the coexistence examples, but they are very specific and they have their own context. But we should think about the new context. We should involve some new formats into the new realities.
Yes, I think that is quite, very important. That it's very difficult indeed to at that moment to identify what are the specific actors and what are the events. But I think what we have started with research, with academic perspective, that we shouldn't forget the grassroots levels and in the countryside, on the community level, people have developed some ideas of coexisting. It might be difficult coexisting, but they have developed over the thousands of years. And the examples of cultural tradition of living and working together, as they have produced a specific relationship. They are quite ritualized relationship, like exaggerated hospitality, but they have a kind of forms of living together, for instance, as neighbors, or as business partners, or even as a family partners. We know in many cases of mixed marriages. So they should perhaps create some possibilities, some ideas for rebuilding local bridges, and perhaps giving some examples of for, let's say, civil society on NGO level, because we should not of course combine everything. We should differentiate examples from villages and civil society. Yeah, I would like to because given the time what we run out, I would read here one more comment, and then we have finalize our discussion. What I have, yeah, Katja Giebel from Heinrich Böll Stiftung. Thank you, Zeus, for the initiative, and Sevil and Vadim for your important approaches, voicing anti-war positions and emphasizing the possibility of peaceful coexistence is so important now. Sevil, your book on the village exchange will be available very soon here in the dossier. Okay. Then there are different, very specific questions. How do we assess the potential of missing kind of mediation possible? Yeah. But I would, we have now 10 past 2, and unfortunately we have finished today our discussion. But I would be encourage you also to develop some ideas of research. And as Vadim mentioned, this is very understudied topic. what is happening in rural settlements. Of course, the situation now has changed, but we should be very careful. But you both, what do you think? What is the most important or also feasible research topic would be for us, sociologists, anthropologists, but also for civil society?
Well, thank you, Tsepelma, for a very good question and recalling the academic research. It's indeed very important, and we should actually, I think we should emphasize or re-emphasize the link between peace building, peace movements, and peace research that was probably in the beginning of the peace research as such, as the field of I call myself not sociologist just in case, but more like peace researcher, or in this case I'm doing ethnography of peace, ethnographer maybe. I think this link is important. So I think it's important that we would reconstruct the linkage between peace research, in whatever sense, in very wide sense, because peace research is not really specific field, but it incorporates different disciplines, or kind of borrows a lot of different things from different disciplines, including anthropology, sociology, and many different things. Peace building at track 2 level, peacemaking track 1, for example. So everything should work in very like kind of cohesive combination with each other, because we all provide and construct in the end knowledge how to operate on the ground. And this is important, that it will not be just you know, like a pretension to listen what peace research or anthropologists or whatever think about how to implement peace, but it should be real work into which academics are involved on the ground as well, together with peace builders. There are some projects like this, luckily there are some projects which is really good, and but again, let me once again remind you one of my main point, that we should also think about the materiality of peace. So not only like in terms of like how we think about peace, what is peace, how to transform the belligerent narratives, discourses. It's basically the same bowl, like kind of mixing the water in the kettle without actually producing anything in the end. Because local peoples, what I have realized, at least from my research, they really expect something tangible from the work of civil society, from the work of politicians, government, civil society, and also even science. So I think this combination should be at least, and the field of peace, which is the most sensitive, the place where you can make a lot of mistakes at the same time, which could be very dramatic mistakes. So, and they have been done already by different interveners into local life of people. So only by working together in cohesive way, we can produce something I think tangible and real for the local communities, those who are affected by conflict. So I think this would be my. I would not actually emphasize any specific case, because there are different things to be studied. The case of coexistence is perhaps the most obvious one, and but at the same time very understudied. And I hope that that will different researchers will find different contexts to study, and there are a lot of things to be studied. It's an enormous field in many ways. And I want to because you read one question that I forgot to answer about how the current situation affected the villages in which I have done my research.
Please say briefly.
Yeah, just to say two words that I don't know, first of all, because I was not there. during this, unfortunately, due to this pandemic situation and other reasons, I was not able to travel in this to this region for doing research. So from the research perspective, I cannot really say. From the perspective of, as I have spoken with these people and as I observed from news, and for example, as I said, today Radio Free Europe published a small video clip about this thing. So this is how I nowadays receive information, and it has affected enormously the local life in terms of how people suffer because of this situation. But again, the good thing that there was no violence. There was no violence, and in terms of like violence on the street, overt violence, direct violence. So people still manage to digest this very difficult situation within their ethnic groups, within their families, without bringing this issue on public in the villages. And this is, I think, really good sign, and it means that at least in this way, peace is possible even during the war. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this words. Sevil, would you like to say final comments? There is a bit, but indeed we really run out of our time. Yes.
Actually, I was going to answer your last question about the ideas for social researchers.
Okay.
First of all, I would suggest to research what was the reason for failure of track 2 process. Why no serious human rights defenders, institutions, networks were established during the 30 years? Why they didn't leave the new generation behind? So there are lots of questions. Of course, we know that the state was was also very suppressive, and they were really not easy to work in the situation of when the state is under the state's pressure. But we know that some those people, they were also let's say very how to say themselves were not reluctant to avoid such problems and violence and nationalistic discourse and narrative. So this is a first suggestion. Another one, what is left unresearched, unstudied, this is a diaspora in Russia, because we know that more than 2 million from both countries, Azerbaijanis and Armenians, are living in Russia, but we still don't know. We are. I'm not going to romanticize the diaspora, but I'm thinking. Of course, there are conflicts, of course, but what I'm thinking that we are hearing only about the conflicts, yeah, because in diaspora. But the practices of coexistence, we don't know. We know nothing, and it's very interesting. And also, for instance, Tbilisi as a case where Armenians and Azerbaijanis were living for centuries. Why, for instance, at the beginning of 20th century, there were no violence, yeah, during all this revolution time. So there are lots of interesting research questions which are still open, and there are lots to do in our region. Yes, on modern conflict, on the past, on the memory, and so on. So
yes, that's true. That now we see how many open questions and research topics from. It's quite very interesting aspect was Vadim also mentioned materiality of peace. I think it's quite innovative idea, and we should pick it up. And you, Sevil, also that the reasons why had this didn't work well on the level of NGOs and civil society. and diaspora and so on. But I have to close now our discussion, and I would like to thank you very, very much for your fantastic contributions, for your efforts and for your energy to bring these issues today in a very difficult time and to talk about peace in the conflict. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you, Tsuboma. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sevil.
And we will hear
It was my
from you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for very good questions as well.